The USS Indianapolis, a cruiser that was sunk by a torpedo from a Japanese submarine near the end of World War II, has been found after 72 years.
Metal ripped open and the ocean rushed in. In just 12 minutes, one of the most powerful ships in the fleet was gone. 1,195 men went into the dark water of the Philippine Sea.
It was the greatest single loss of life at sea in U.S. Navy history, with only about 300 of the 1,200 crew members surviving.
Most people look right past this part, but the Navy actually knew the ship was missing. They just did not do anything. Recent dives to the wreckage show exactly where the torpedoes hit. But if you look a little closer, you find the real story. It was a huge failure by the leaders on land. Silent heavy cruiser. The USS Indianapolis was a Portland-class heavy cruiser. It was huge, weighing nearly 10,000 tons. In July of 1945, it was given a mission so secret that even the captain did not know what was in the crates. They were carrying the enriched uranium and parts for the little boy bomb. This was the weapon that would eventually end the war. Because the mission was so secret, the ship was told to sail fast and mostly by itself. It finished its delivery at Tinian Island and then headed for the Philippines. Plain and simple, it was a hero ship. But here's where it gets tricky. The ship did not have any sonar to find submarines. Captain Charles McVeigh asked for an escort, but the Navy said no. They told him the waters were safe. Most folks have no idea that there were actually Japanese submarines reported in the area just days before. The Navy leaders knew there was danger, but they did not tell the captain. The ship was sailing through the Philippine Sea on a very dark night. They were supposed to zigzag to make it hard for submarines to hit them, but the visibility was so poor that the captain decided to go straight for a while. If you take away all the noise, it is about this. The ship was a giant target and it had no way to see what was coming. It was 610 feet of steel moving through the waves at 17 knots. While everyone was looking over here at the victory of the mission, this was happening. A Japanese submarine called I-58 was waiting in the dark. The commander of that sub, Mochitsura Hashimoto, saw the silhouette of the big cruiser. He could not believe his luck. He lined up his torpedoes and waited. The USS Indianapolis was just hours away from its next port, but it would never get there. Most people look right past this part. The ship was not just a random victim. It was part of a giant machine that was moving too fast to care about safety. The sailors on board were tired but happy. They finished their big secret job. They thought they were going to get a break. But in the deep water under them, the torpedoes were already in the air. But they had no idea what was following them in the dark. Fire in the water. Fast forward a little bit and things looked totally different. At 15 minutes after midnight, the first torpedo hit. It blew the bow of the ship right off. A second later, another torpedo hit the middle of the ship near the fuel tanks. This caused a massive explosion that knocked out all the power. Believe it or not, it gets even weirder. Because the power was out, they could not send a clear radio message that everyone could hear. The ship started to tilt to the side very fast. Men were jumping out of their beds into a world of fire and smoke. To say it was big is not even the half of it. The ship was sinking so fast that there was no time to drop most of the lifeboats. Men had to jump into the oily water and hope for the best. About 900 men made it into the water alive. The rest were gone in those first 12 minutes. Most folks have no idea that the ship actually did send out some distress calls. 3 different stations on land heard the SOS. But wait, there is one big problem. One officer was sleeping. Another told his men not to wake him up. A third officer thought it was a Japanese trick to lure them out. None of them reported the signal. They just went back to sleep or ignored it. If you look a little closer, you find the real story of how the ship disappeared. In the middle of the night, the giant cruiser slipped under the waves and headed 3 miles down to the bottom. The 900 survivors were left in the dark. They were covered in thick black fuel oil that stung their eyes and lungs. They huddled together in groups waiting for the sun to come up. They were sure the Navy would see they were missing by morning. But it is not as easy as it looks. The Navy had a rule that said combat ships did not have to report when they arrived. This meant if a ship did not show up, nobody had to ask why. This tiny detail is what almost everyone misses. It was a rule made for safety, but it ended up being a death sentence. The sun started to come up on the first day and the men looked at the horizon. They saw nothing but blue water. Now, the real nightmare was just starting for those in the water. Thirst in the sun. When the sun came up, the men realized they were in big trouble. Most of them only had life vests, not rafts. They were tied together in groups to keep from drifting away. But then the visitors arrived. Hundreds of oceanic white-tip sharks started to circle the groups. This is the part that makes absolutely no sense to people who were not there. The sharks did not attack right away. They just waited. The men were in the water for 4 days. The sun was burning their skin during the day and they were freezing at night. They had no food and, even worse, no water. Some men got so thirsty that they drank the salt water. This made them lose their minds. They started to see things that were not there. They thought the ship was just under the surface or that there was an island nearby. Believe it or not, it gets even weirder. The sharks started taking men one by one. It was not even close to a fair fight. The men would try to kick and scream to scare them away, but there were too many. Every time someone gave up or drifted away from the group, the sharks moved in. By the second and third day, the number of survivors was dropping fast. Let's look at what is actually happening with the Navy during this time. Planes were flying over the area every day, but they were flying at 10,000 feet. They were looking for big ships, not tiny heads in the water. The pilots looked right over the survivors and saw nothing. On land, the officers at the port saw that the USS Indianapolis had not arrived. They just assumed the orders had changed. The part that nobody talks about is how close help was the whole time. Ships were passing only a few dozen miles away. If the Navy had just checked their tracking boards, they would have seen a giant hole where the Indianapolis should be. But they didn't. They just kept working their office jobs while 900 men became 300. A plane was coming, but it was not looking for them. Office failures cost lives. Let's switch gears for a second and look at the officers on land. This is the part that trips everyone up. The Navy tried to blame the captain for everything later, but the real fault was in the offices. There were 2 different headquarters that were supposed to watch the ship. Both of them thought the other one was doing the job. One officer, Lieutenant Stuart Gibson, was the one who was supposed to report if the ship was overdue. When the Indianapolis did not show up on July 31st, he did nothing. He said later that he did not think it was his job to report it. He just went about his day. This was not a small mistake. It changed everything, no question about it. Here is the tiny detail that almost everyone misses. There was a secret message sent to the port saying the ship was on its way, but the person who received it could not decode it. Instead of asking for a new copy, they just threw it away. They didn't even try to find out what it said. Because of that, the port did not even know for sure that the ship was coming. Most folks have no idea that a message was also sent saying a Japanese submarine had sunk a ship in that area. The Navy intelligence officers saw it, but they did not pass it on to the ships in the water. They thought it was old news. It is not even the half of it. The carelessness was happening at every single level of the command. To put it in simple words, the survivors were invisible because the Navy wanted them to be. They were so focused on the secret bomb and the end of the war that they forgot to watch their own back. It took a pilot named Wilbur Gwynn, who was just out on a regular patrol, to see something weird in the water on August 2nd. He saw an oil slick and followed it. He thought he found a submarine, but then he saw people waving. The biggest secret was still hidden deep on the ocean floor. Deep sea discovery. Fast forward to 2017 and all the way to 2025. A team led by Paul Allen found the wreckage 18,000 feet down. This is deeper than the Titanic. They used special robots to look at the ship. What they found proves the survivors were telling the truth. The ship was torn apart, but the damage shows it was fighting until the very last second. The divers and researchers found the exact spots where the torpedoes hit, but it gets even weirder. They also found evidence that the ship's equipment was in better shape than the Navy claimed at the trial. The Navy tried to say the ship was not prepared, but the wreckage shows the men were doing their jobs. If you look a little closer, you find the real story in the declassified papers that came out recently. These new findings show that the Navy actually had several reports of the sinking within the first 24 hours. They just did not want to admit they lost the ship that carried the atomic bomb. They waited until the bomb was dropped on Japan to tell the public about the Indianapolis. They used the secret mission as an excuse for their own mistakes. The part that nobody talks about is how they treated Captain McVeigh. They blamed him for not zigzagging, even though the Japanese commander said it would not have mattered. They even brought the Japanese commander to the trial to talk against him. Most folks have no idea that it took until the year 2000 for the captain to be cleared of blame. A schoolboy doing a history project was the one who finally got the truth out. To say it was a disaster is not even the half of it. It was a failure of the heart of the Navy. Today, the wreck sits in the dark, a quiet grave for hundreds of men. It serves as a reminder that the rules of an office can be just as deadly as the weapons of an enemy. When you look at the real facts, you see a story of heroes who were left behind by the people they were fighting for. If you take away all the noise, it's about this. The USS Indianapolis was a great ship with a great crew. They did their job perfectly. They delivered the bomb. They sailed the path they were told. They fought when the torpedoes hit. The only people who didn't do their job were the ones sitting in safe offices miles away from the sharks. Could a disaster like this happen today with all our new gadgets and tracking? It makes you wonder if we are still missing key details about our own history. If you found this story as wild as I did, hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. What do you think was the biggest mistake the Navy made? Let me know in the comments below.